All right, well, welcome to War in the Constitution. This is number 11 in the series that I do, the In the Constitution series, and I've intentionally placed this war presentation at the end. There's a lot that we've thought about and learned about in war, and our perspective may be changed today. Hopefully will be changed a little bit as we look at what the Constitution itself has to say about war. I want to be very clear up front that I very much respect and honor those brave men and women who have been placed in harm's way. I honor them, those who are currently serving, who have served. There may be some critiquing today that we talk about some of the issues surrounding war of the leaders who have placed them in harm's way. And so I want to make the distinction there. Anything I say today, I hope will never be construed to say that I'm not pro-troop or pro-America or pro-armed forces. I very much am. But I'm very much also for the proper role of war and what the Constitution has to say about its role. So we'll get started. We'll start talking about definitions. That's where we always start. So two terms that are often thrown around is this idea of isolationism and non-interventionism. A lot of people like to say, well, those are the same things. But let's look at their definitions. Okay, isolationism is to not have any dealings with foreign nations. Isolationism says we're going to stick our head in the sand and disregard the fact that we live in the world. Okay, and it's kind of a derogatory term, right? Whereas non-interventionism is defined as not getting involved in the affairs of foreign nations. Non-interventionism says we're not going to go and meddle in the affairs of other nations. It's not our issue, it's their issue, okay? Now, we could talk a ton about that, the implications of those, but we're not going to. We're simply going to define what isolation is and what non-intervention is, two distinct terms. The next definition is this idea of preemptive war. Now, this has a lot of political undertones as well. We're not going to get into that. We're going to just stick at the definition. Preemptive war is defined as being the first to break the peace, the initiation of armed conflict, an offensive act of aggression, making war without being attacked first. So if you engage in preemptive war, you are the first to attack. Okay? Now, like I said, there's some political undertones there. We're not going to really get into that. Just wanted to clarify what preemptive war means. And lastly, the definition of war itself. Okay? War is a conflict carried on by force of arms. So we hear about the war on drugs, okay, or the war on poverty. And it's semantics, but it kind of reduces that word war, to not mean that much. Okay? But war is something that's very dramatic. War involves a conflict carried on by force of arms. It involves killing. It involves human beings shooting at each other. And we need to understand that's what war is, okay, as far as definitions go. Now, today we're talking about war in the Constitution, but I wanted to make sure we understand there's three distinct terms we're going to focus on, okay? We're going to talk about war, but we're also going to talk about national defense and foreign policy. Those three things are intertwined in this idea of war, but they're actually three distinct ideas as well that we're going to explore and look at definitions and constitutional references to those three distinct separate issues as well. Okay, so is war ever justified? Yes, there's justification for war. In 3rd century Christendom, a lot of the Christian leaders got together and said, look, we've been fighting wars for centuries. People are always killing each other. We need to get together and decide on what is a justified war. And what they came up with is something called the just war theory. The just war theory has 8 principal features. The first one is this: the idea that defensive war alone is legitimate. The damage inflicted by the aggressor nation must be lasting, grave, and certain. Okay, there's a quote by Martin Luther that I like. That's really an interesting one. He says, "At the very outset, I want to say that whosoever starts a war is in the wrong. Let it be the first thing to be said in this matter. No war is just, even if it is a war between equals, unless one has such a good reason for fighting, and such a good conscience that he can say, 'My neighbor compels and forces me to fight, though I had rather avoid it.' In that case, it can be called not only war, but lawful self-defense." That was an interesting quote supporting this idea, the first point of the just war theory, that defensive war alone is legitimate. The second point, it must be formally declared by proper authority. The third point of the just war theory is it has to have a just cause and right intention. Obviously, there's some subjectivity to that, but there should be a just cause and a right intention. Number 4 is last resort after all else has failed. That's why we have diplomacy. That's why we try to talk it out in word before we pull out our swords and fight it out, right? The last resort after all else has failed. Number 5, limited and unchanging objectives. Peace must be a central motive even in the midst of violence. So the limited and unchanging objective means once you get into a war and you fight it and you accomplish the purpose, you don't say, well, while we're here, we may as well do this, and while we're here, you probably should do this, and we might want to do this too, and do this as well. The just war theory would say, wait, that's beyond the perspective or the objective for which you entered the war in the first place. Okay? You go to war for peace. All right, number 6, there must be a high likelihood of success. It's kind of a no-brainer. Don't go to war if you don't think you're going to win. It's pretty low chances we're going to win here. Number 7, proportionate means. If somebody slaps you on the face, you don't pull out your your RPG or your hand grenade and blow them up. That's non-proportionate means. A just war would say, wait, we're not going to use a nuclear weapon on someone who did some small thing. There's a proportionate means issue there. And number 8, non-combatants must not be targeted. Non-combatants are often called collateral damage. Okay, why would non-combatants not be targeted? Because they're not involved in the war. They're civilians. They're not the ones attacking, so they shouldn't be attacked. Okay, so we can have a whole presentation on the just war theory, and in some ways we are today. And I don't want to go into the details of that, except to point out those 8 defining factors help, at least from my perspective, and I think it's still a current theory that's floating around out there. The just war theory says you meet these obligations, you can comply with these terms, and then you have a justified war. So I think as Americans, we have a war that we were engaged in that we all feel was justified. It was the war for independence, right? And so an interesting thing that I did, I compared the just war theory to the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration kind of says why we went to war. And it's interesting when you start to make these comparisons. On the left-hand side, we're going to set up a little chart here that talks the original wording of the Declaration. And on the right-hand side, we're going to have the just war theory that corresponds. Okay? So first of all, the Declaration says this, quote, "A nation should declare the cause which impels them to the separation." Okay? That equates and corresponds with the just war theory that says it must be formally declared by proper authority. Okay? See the declaration there. Now, the Declaration of Independence says, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. The founder said, look, we're so sure about what we're doing that we're going to appeal to God himself to say, judge us for what we're doing. We feel like it's right. Okay? Now, the just war theory that goes along with that is this idea of just cause and right intention. Okay? That our just cause and right intention, we feel so right about it, we're going to have God judge us. Another thing that the founders put together was this idea in the Declaration that says, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Not only are we going to let God judge us, we feel so right about what we're doing that we're going to submit facts to a candid world. Let them judge us for the justness and the rightness of our intention. Okay? So, kind of 2 interesting things they use that apply to that just war theory of just cause and right intention. Next one, they say governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. You don't just change, something went wrong, we're going to change a whole government. No. We're not going to do that. That corresponds with the just war theory that says the damage inflicted by the aggressor nation must be lasting, grave, and certain. Do you see the correlation there? Okay. Nextly, the Declaration, in keeping the same just war theory principle there, when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Okay? Over and over and over, the same pattern. It's lasting, it's grave, it's certain. Okay? And one more point they made that corresponds. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. Okay? Repeated. Over and over. Lasting, grave, and certain. Next, the Declaration says, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. And that corresponds to the idea that it's a last resort after all else has failed. That the colonies patiently suffered over and over and over. They didn't want to go to the war. They tried to resolve things. They tried to communicate with the King of Britain. They tried to talk about how to fix these issues. Okay? And those things didn't happen, didn't occur. Lastly, the Declaration says it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, which to me corresponds to the idea that defensive war is legitimate. It becomes their duty and their right at some point when they've been oppressed over and over and over and over. The founders said, we have no other choice in an act of defense to declare war and engage in war against the mother country. Okay? So we've all accepted the idea that the war for independence was a just war, and hopefully now applying the ideas in the Declaration to the just war theory helps us legitimize it. Yeah, it was a just war. Okay? All right, so hopefully, I don't know, that's interesting to me. I hope it is to you.